Welcome to Running. I'm Michael Carey with the 2014 Assembly candidates. Candidates for 6 seats are on the ballot. We will hear from each candidate in an interview after opening statements. Let's start with District 1B, downtown, and incumbent Pat Flynn. Mr. Flynn, your opening statement of 1 minute, please.
Thank you very much, Mr. Carey. My name is Patrick Flynn, and thank you to Alaska Public Media, KSK, and KAKM for allowing we candidates to introduce ourselves to voters. For the last 6 years, I've had the honor and pleasure of representing the downtown district, which includes the terrific neighborhoods of downtown, Fairview, Government Hill, Mountain View, and South Addition. I've worked hard to be a collaborative assembly member, to work with my colleagues to whatever their political beliefs, and focused on some issues around things like the budget, transportation, and matters more specific to neighborhoods. I've really enjoyed the work. I hope I've done a good job, and with your permission, I will do it for 3 more years.
You're an incumbent seeking another term. What is your primary accomplishment, and what do you hope to accomplish if you continue?
I think when I first came on the Assembly, you may recall things were somewhat rancorous between the various factions that were on the Assembly. And I'm pleased to say that we've achieved a more harmonious existence. Even though we don't necessarily always agree, we tend to work together in an effective manner. I think that's a very positive thing for Anchorage, and we make decisions in general in a more rational manner as opposed to political ideology. Some of the things I'm working on that I'd like to continue are some redevelopment opportunities, particularly in the eastern portion of my district, and some fiscal management matters that would improve the long-term financial health of the city.
When you talk to voters in your district, what are their main concerns?
Well, it really depends on what neighborhood they live in. The downtown district is the most diverse in Anchorage, whether you talk about ethnicity or socioeconomics or basically any measure. And so on the west side of the district, it tends to be more focused on provision of services. On the east side, it tends to be how do we manage some of the impacts around social services and some of the people who are less fortunate among us.
Okay. The dispute over the Sullivan administration's revisions of the labor laws have dominated Assembly news for about a year now. Did you support the changes? If so, why? If not, why not?
I didn't support the changes, and it was less about the substance of them than the process that brought them about. Frankly, had I behaved in a manner that the Sullivan administration did, where they essentially hid things from public view and rammed the legislation through without appropriate public process, I'd be embarrassed. I'm glad I wasn't associated with that, and I think there were some reasonable changes within the ordinance, and we'll see what happens with the referendum. But I think what would be appropriate would be to revisit it and come up with a better solution that made sense for the city and for working people.
There were predictions when the legislation passed that it would affect the municipal workforce. Has it so far?
It has, primarily in that you see a decline in morale amongst the people who work for the city. And it's troubling to me because we have a lot of good people who do a lot of good things. I worked very closely with a number of people for sort of the basics, street cleaning, street plowing, that sort of thing. But when they feel like their boss doesn't value what they do, it makes it harder for them to get up and go to work every day in a good mood, and that results in a degradation of service.
Now, if I'm correct, right, the Sullivan legislation has not taken effect yet. It's pending, right?
Correct.
Okay, so that leads us to this question. The labor law referendum or initiative, has been moved to November to repeal this legislation. Mm-hmm. How did you come down on moving the election to the fall or the winter?
I wanted it to be on the ballot here in April. I felt it was appropriate that we deal with it and move on. The decision to move it to November, I don't want to speak to anybody else's motivations. That isn't appropriate. But to me, it's process delayed is like process denied. The voters brought forth a referendum to repeal the legislation. It should have been placed on the ballot at the first possible opportunity, and that would have been in April.
How much money are you planning to spend in this campaign, and who are your primary contributors?
Not going to spend a whole lot. I've been doing this for a long enough time that hopefully my neighbors know me and will make a decision based on that relationship that we've had over these years. I've been getting money from some of the employee unions. Received some money from some developers. I haven't done a lot of solicitation, so it just sort of shows up in the mailbox, and I put it in the bank.
And how much do you think that'll be in the end?
In the end, I expect I'll raise somewhere between $15,000 and $20,000.
Okay. There have been a number of stories on the reduction of size of the police force. Do we have an adequate number of police officers here in Anchorage to keep Anchorage safe?
We are probably okay at the moment. The bigger risk is that we don't have enough trainees in the pipeline to replace the police who are likely to retire in the coming years. So it needs to be an area of focus. We need to do a better job of recruiting for our academies. The last one we had was not full. That's, to me, a waste of resources because you still need instructors. They cost the same amount of money whether you have 14 recruits or 20 recruits. So it is an issue that we need to keep an eye on in the years ahead.
One thing I wondered about in the selection of potential officers for the academy is I think something like 1,000 people applied and only a handful qualified. I guess you want the police department to have high standards, but you have to wonder if maybe the perfect's being the enemy of the good. What do you think?
That's actually been a matter of discussion. Chief Mew has changed some of the requirements with the idea that you can get a few more people through the door. That said, we ask a lot of our police. They have a very difficult job. You certainly don't want any weak applicants in that pool.
Okay. Here's a hardy perennial. The expansion and rebuild of the Port of Anchorage seems to be an endless source of tribulation. Money wasted, delays, pointed fingers. This has become something of a mess. How do we get out?
There are days I wish I'd never looked out my window and seen the tote ship.
You have a view of the port of...
I do, and I was the one who sort of started peeling the onion back and chaired the port committee for a year. That led to a lot of the discoveries that we're talking about now. I am hopeful that the new contract we have with CH2M Hill as our port management project contractor leads to a more rational plan. The tragedy of this scenario was years ago in the Wirtz administration there was a plan to replace the existing facility with the traditional pile-supported dock design. Somehow that morphed into this mega project. Clearly it was a mistake. I think if we can ratchet back to that original plan, and I hope that's what CH2M Hill recommends, then we can move forward with the dollars we have available, and probably a few more, unfortunately, and get to a design that makes sense based on the business of the port, not some pie-in-the-sky future opportunity.
And this is a very practical matter. We have to fix the port, right?
We do.
I mean, not just for ourselves, but for the state of Alaska, really.
Yeah, 80 to 90%, depending on what statistics you use, of goods serving Rail Belt Alaska come through the Port of Anchorage.
Okay, great. The legislature continues to fund the proposed Knik Arm crossing, sometimes at lower levels than the proponents would want. Yet the crossing continues to be controversial. Will there be a crossing? And what's your view on the crossing, yay or nay?
The crossing as currently proposed will not occur. What will ultimately happen is the bureaucrats at Cabada will spend the federal earmark they receive from Congress, and once they have to compete for state dollars versus other projects, state appropriators will decide that it's not worth it. And we will end up with a bunch of lovely studies that we can put on a shelf and pull off for the day when it is appropriate to build the crossing.
Has there been a discussion, or there's been a discussion, but has there been an open explanation of what the toll would be if this is completed, or is the answer that depends on how much it costs to build the bridge?
The studies that have been done related to the toll have not been, I think, very rigorous, and so, 10, 15, 20 bucks, who knows? But really, people are throwing darts and hoping they hit the bullseye on the financials associated with this project.
Sticking with transportation, what is Anchorage's #1 transportation priority?
From my perspective, how we execute connection between the Seward and Glen highways is going to be a key component of transportation planning in the 10 to 20 years ahead. If they do it right, it could be dramatically helpful to both Mountain View and Fairview in that it would provide more surface transportation options and better connectivity between the parts of the neighborhoods while allowing those who need to transit through Anchorage more seamless network.
Okay, alcohol continues to be involved in a disproportionate percentage of crime and disorder. What can be done to reduce the damage alcohol does to our community?
I think the key is more treatment, frankly. You may recall back in 2002 there was state legislation that increased alcohol taxes that was sponsored by then Representative Lisa Murkowski. The idea was those dollars would go to more treatment options. The next year her father was governor. Tax receipts weren't as high as expected from the oil industry, and so those dollars instead went to other projects. I would like to see, in fact I was just in Juneau last week talking to legislators, I would like to see those dollars dedicated, sorry you can't dedicate, I'd like to see those dollars earmarked for treatment programs so that we can start addressing the problem in a more effective manner than we have to date.
Okay. The number of street people fluctuates, but street people who are homeless are a permanent part of the community. How can we reduce their numbers and the friction between street people and or homeless people and the rest of society?
I'm a big fan of the Housing First initiative. It's a challenge, but people might be surprised to learn that there's actually quite a few facilities like that throughout Anchorage. You know, the one at 5th and Carlick got the most attention, but there are lots of other smaller ones. Getting people a safe, warm place to stay makes a tremendous difference in their lives, reduces the conflicts with neighbors and neighborhoods, and makes, frankly, our community a better place.
If you visit our libraries, you will find them crowded. But are we appropriating enough money to meet the needs of the public that's using our public libraries?
It's a great question. I've been the consistent voice for the library on the Assembly the past several years, getting them a few more dollars for operating hours or a few more dollars for materials. One of our number one priority before the legislature this year is an appropriation to remodel the Lusac Library so that it can accommodate more patrons and more effectively serve them. I think we're doing a pretty good job. I think we could do a better job, and it's clearly one of the valued assets of our community.
What do you make of the argument that you hear occasionally that, well, we don't need the libraries in the way we had them in the past because everybody's got the internet?
I happen to represent some parts of Anchorage that don't have the internet, at least not as often as others. And beyond that, you know, there's enough people who truly value a good book. We need strong libraries. And I love the fact that when I tell my son to go downstairs and get dressed every morning, he's probably reading a book instead of getting dressed.
Anchorage municipal elections are nominally nonpartisan, but are they really nonpartisan? What's your experience been?
That's really quite funny. I was just remembering with a friend of mine, the Republican Party endorsed me the first time I ran. And of course, I'm a Democrat. They are less partisan than state and federal elections, but there are certain philosophies that dominate certain parts of the conversation around municipal governance, and those philosophies tend to adhere to one political party or the other. That's never going to go away. I do value the fact that I can honestly tell people who don't agree with me or aren't of the same party that I am, that I still represent them and I still want to do what I can to ensure they get appropriate levels of municipal service.
In about 40 seconds, what would you like to change about Anchorage if you could be the czar for a day?
The czar for a day. I would like Anchorage, the people of Anchorage, to embrace a philosophy where we should work together all the time. Just because someone disagrees with us doesn't mean they're a doofus or a jerk. It just means they have a different approach to things, and we should figure out how we work together.
Okay, in other words, find the best parts of Anchorage and put them together.
Amen.
Okay. Well, thank you very much, Patrick Flynn, for joining us, Mr. Flynn, for joining us.